Welcome back to the latest Offshore Europe podcast, live from the wood stand here at Offshore Europe in Aberdeen. I'm Eamonn Collins, and I'm going to be the host for this session, which focuses on hydrogen, a topic that we've heard a lot about already this week. To get into building a hydrogen economy, I'm delighted to be joined by two distinguished guests. We've got Martin Banks, Director of Hydrogen and Power-to-X for wood across the EMEA region, and Keiren Lake from Siemens Energy, Corporate Account Manager at Siemens Energy. Thank you both very much for joining us, gents.
Thank you. Thanks for having us.
Thank you, Eamonn. Thank you.
Okay, Martin, I'm going to start with you. So, I guess there's a lot of buzz around hydrogen. There has been for a number of years. Certainly this week we've heard an awful lot about, as we start thinking about the energy systems of the future in the next 50 years, that hydrogen is going to play an increasingly important role. I'm interested in your reflections on, why is hydrogen so important to that net zero journey?
Eamonn, it's a good question. I think the answer comes down to the versatility of it. It serves a really important decarbonisation role where electrification can't help, and hydrogen is very effective at filling those gaps out into a number of off-takers. But actually, even beyond the off-take purpose of hydrogen, its ability to transport energy is very useful as well as a vector. So it plugs the gaps over electrification, which I think from a decarbonisation perspective is our primary goal.
So, Keiren, what are your thoughts?
Yeah, well, I think hydrogen is abundant. It's everywhere, but it's linked to things. So we've got to look at how we then split it off. And I think, as Martin was saying there, it is very versatile. We know it. We know hydrogen. Been using hydrogen in different process industries for a long time. And now we need to look at how we can move that into decarbonisation of industries, which, for example, electrification isn't a good fit. And I think what we're seeing right now is the starting point there around, let's look at refining, for example, where hydrogen's been displacing sort of grey hydrogen in there, but looking at how to get that in there with then moving on to like the methanols, for example, or ammonia, being able to take hydrogen, which is not easy to move long distances as a molecule, but looking at how to bring it from where, for example, Saudi Arabia or Chile, where we're doing work, and we've got abundance of renewable energy, converting that, transporting it easily and economically to where the demand is. And that's the key thing, balancing of supply and demand.
Yeah, exactly. I think when you're at Offshore Europe, it's easy to get caught up in the UK context or the Scottish context. But when we look at the map globally, where the centres of low-cost hydrogen production exist, and Scotland and the wider UK has the potential to be thereabouts, but where the ultimately the lowest cost production areas isn't where the highest demand is, and hydrogen is excellent through Power-to-X solutions with ammonia particularly to move that product to the areas that it's needed.
There was one of the points on the panel session that you were both on earlier this morning, which I thought was important, which was, there's a lot of debate and discussion around the colours of hydrogen and, how that hydrogen's produced. But it strikes me that to a certain extent, that's a little bit of a distraction. And I'm thinking that obviously kind of green hydrogen will happen in places where, for example, it'll be location contingent, where there is a good renewable source. Blue hydrogen, for example, might work in, say, high emitting industries where you've got, things like carbon capture can fit. I'm just interested, Martin, I'll start with yourself in terms of this focus on colours. Is it an impediment? Is it important? Or should we just be focusing on scaling up the capacity and the infrastructure?
I think it's a slight impediment because at the end of the day, hydrogen a key enabler in establishing a hydrogen economy is what the actual public perception of it is. And we have a job to do there in sharing evidence of its use and its benefits. Putting whether it's green or blue or grey or brown or pink into the mix, it just causes confusion. At the point of use, it doesn't matter where it came from. Obviously, from a clean energy perspective, we're looking at blue and green, but if a hydrogen is hydrogen, and as Keiren said, we've been using it for decades. So yeah, I think from a customer perspective, we should move away from thinking about it so we can clarify the sell of the benefits of hydrogen.
Yeah. No, that is a good point, and we all get, particularly in the press, what colour is it? Because it's easy to remember. What we've got to be looking at is low or zero carbon hydrogen, wherever it's derived from, and also to create an economy quickly, scale. And quite frankly, that isn't necessarily going to come out from so-called green electrolysis. The quick and easy way is through the technologies of steam reforming, for example, of which wood is very active in, decarbonising existing processes and looking then at new build-outs to volume, which in the UK, we've got natural gas still. Use it, start to develop higher volumes of hydrogen and then mixing that to the demand. And I think, as we showed this morning, is that sort of to 2030 at least, that sort of green gradually coming up and then blue going in chunks because of the build-out. But let's be agnostic on colour, and I think that's not the important. It's low carbon or zero carbon hydrogen we need to be talking about.
Yeah.
Just sticking with again, Keiren, I think one of the points that you were making earlier, which I'd like you to expand on, is this notion of momentum. And I think there's been a lot of projects in the hydrogen space that have been concept, early phase. But how do we accelerate? What are some of the barriers we need to overcome to accelerate that into the execution stage?
It is a good thing I think we showed this morning, and the recent report showed there's exponential growth actually in the number of projects out there. But getting those to FID still is a struggle, and 1 in 10 I think eventually gets there. What are the drivers there? I think government has a role to play, regulation, seed funding to get things done, not just in the production side but in the infrastructure. And we mentioned, for example, Siemens Energy, headquartered in Germany, the German government, and also I was in the Netherlands last week actually looking at, we're going to start paving the way for the infrastructure to be able then the producers and the supply chain and the demand to get together. So both. One is stimulation of the economy, and then I think is volume, getting access to low carbon hydrogen.
There's never been a better analogy as a chicken and egg with hydrogen. Do you produce it and they will come, or do you need to demonstrate the demand's there before you produce it? What the US have done has been very aggressive in incentivizing production. And whilst the offtake plans are embryonic, they're comfortable that they've got that government backing to proceed. I think when we look at the type of projects that we've been involved with at Wood, we do have a global reach. We are touching projects in every region, but there has been a shift to the volume or the proportion in the US because the developers are operating globally. They're looking, where can I get the best return on my investment or allocation of resource, so they look there. So I think the UK, Europe, we've got to be mindful of that, and things seem to be improving now, but we've got to be mindful of having that skills drain or that focus moving elsewhere.
I think that's a really good point, Martin, as well. And you talked there about the Inflation Reduction Act, and one of the things coming through this week is this sort of the simplicity and the clarity of it, not just from a developer's perspective, but also from an off-taker's perspective, and actually understanding, where they might fit into that value chain as well.
Yeah, the simplicity of it, I think, has been key. We all understand the mechanism that these projects have been built around, and it lets the developer appraise their business case with a lot more confidence.
And I think it's a key point actually, is having projects which have which are fundable. And I think that's at the end of the day, and I think in the US they've done that typical US style very clearly, very boldly as well. It's not just tinkering, it's a very bold statement, but also linked to not just supply and demand, but part of that is also supply chain. So, having this, you will do this in the US to get these fundings. So companies like ourselves, rightio, we've got to do something here right now. And also they've looked at, we're seeing a lot of projects out there right now which are getting through FID at scale, but they're looking at sustainable aviation fuel right now as a key one, because there is a demand from the airlines right now. I want that fuel and I'm prepared to pay a premium for it. And I think that's what we're seeing in the industry. The other one is shipping. We're doing a lot of work around methanol, for example, e-methanol.
Yep.
Why? Because the shipping industry wants to have, or has to have, mandated to have, carbon reduction or CO2 emission reductions.
Well, we're now seeing orders placed on vessels that will run on those e-fuels.
Yes.
So they're almost forcing the hand to have the product there for them.
And a lot of those actually don't rely on, they have a proven business case. They don't rely on government subsidy, actually. And I think that's where we're focusing our business as well, is really looking at finding those where you've got demand, supply and demand, but multiple rollout of projects globally.
Yeah.
And I think that's an area where I think we're focusing our efforts, and I think along the lines of working together with the likes of the Woods to find those and deliver them?
It's been a little bit of an education over the last couple of years, because obviously when you think of Wood, you think of the project development support that we provide. But within our clean energy team, we've also been supporting clients with their funding applications and just becoming more familiar with the eligibility criteria, the evaluation criteria, understanding the importance of engaging with the supply chain or offtake agreements. It's really opened our eyes to the context of the projects that we operate in, and I think it's made us much better engineers for it. We understand not only the nuts and bolts of making the project a success, but making the environment for the project to be a success as well.
Yeah. One of the things, we talked a little bit about off-takers and all the kind of various areas where hydrogen could be used, and this isn't just aspiration. Certainly what we've seen is that there are clear, punchy targets in place, and I'm thinking the UK has a target of 10 gigawatts of low-carbon hydrogen by 2030. Scotland has its own target of 5 gigawatt by 2030, 25 by 2045. The EU wants to do 10 million tonnes of clean hydrogen by 2030. And yet I think 2030 really isn't that far off. It's almost 6.5 years away. I guess if, for example, the hydrogen economy really does accelerate and get moving quickly, Martin, I'm going to start with you. I mean, is there a concern around the supply chain and the capacity to actually deliver on those ambitious goals?
There is, and it's an area we often are asked to investigate as part of these feasibility projects. Can we apply the knowledge that we've got from consulting through to capital project delivery to help the developer understand what the timeline looks like for their project? Many of our clients are coming in from the renewable space. They're very accustomed to building solar and wind projects, a lot less so hydrogen. I mean, everybody is, I suppose, at the scales we're looking at now. So any guidance we can provide on a development timeline is important, but the supply chain actually is where the risk sits. Techno-economically, we'd like to resolve a few more risks around offtake certainty, but from a project delivery perspective, the risk sits with the supply chain.
It's an issue and a challenge which we have to address, and I think from our side, it's not just around electrolysis, for example, where showed this morning, not just Siemens Energy, but all of the major suppliers have got big build-out plans for new capacity. Is it enough? And I think by 2030, no, a lot more has to be done. But it isn't only electrolysis where we've got materials. It's two things. One is engineering slots, so human resources getting there. And it's also other parts of the balance of plant, the infrastructure, the power infrastructure, to get power to electrolysis, for example. Transformers, simple things, but but there's a lot of you're looking at years of lead times on there. You have to factor that in.
A red flag we've seen recently, actually, and it's a change as we liaise with electrolyzer OEMs to receive budget inquiries for various projects. 2 years ago, they would offer a scope of supply of a box, this size. Now they're retracting the items that they're a little bit less comfortable that they'll be able to secure, like the transformers. So perhaps outside of the electrolyzer's gift to manufacture them, but they need to include them as part of their package. So we're seeing some instances of now starting to exclude that from their service because that concern around the availability of the product and the supply chain is real.
Well, that is an important point, and it's a differentiator, I would say, for Siemens Energy, because within the portfolio, we've got a big part of that, so we can manage, hopefully, on projects and look at not just the electrolyzer, but the power equipment around it, the compression, the interconnections to grid, for example, and help making de-risking projects and then looking at schedule security as well, which I think is an important part. And early engagement in projects is key, so that, being open about it, but the early engagement to lock in manufacturing slots is a key part, I think, of working together from across the whole industry.
We talked a little bit earlier around policy, and we've talked now around kind of some of the challenges and the opportunities within the supply chain. I guess one of the other areas I want to touch on is costs. And I guess there is a perception that at the minute, a lot of hydrogen projects, it's still a requirement on policy and subsidy, and certainly there's a discussion around how do we drive towards that lower levelized cost of hydrogen. I'll start with yourself, Martin, in terms of where are you seeing some of the opportunities perhaps to, drive down the cost of hydrogen projects?
One of the largest opportunities we see at the moment, and what I particularly like about it is it's like one of these rare win-win scenarios. Particularly in the UK, you touched on it this morning, the potential we've got in offshore wind around the north of Scotland. The grid can't absorb the power potential that'll come from those offshore wind developments. The demand is all in the south of the UK. There is every year the government pays a considerable sum of money to developers for curtailment payments. That is for me is a great route for realising significant savings in the overall levelised cost of a hydrogen project. Around 50% of the cost of the produced hydrogen is in the power to drive the electrolyser. So if projects can take advantage of peaks and troughs in the power price market, then I think that's a great enabler in the success of the project, and it's somewhere we can help. We're developing optimization tools now which can integrate how the electrolyser operates with perhaps the downstream power to X, with the storage of the product, and with the renewable sizing, so that we can design a process plan which works with the renewable plan to allow the developer or the operator to extract as much product as they can when the power prices are advantageous to do so. It's a really, really interesting space.
What about yourself, Keiren, from a technology perspective? Is that cost opportunity, where are you seeing that?
Yeah, I think a lot of it comes from obviously continued development of driving cost out of, or engineering cost out of the product, but then it comes down to scale, manufacturing at scale, and standardization. So looking, and green H2 particularly lends itself to a high degree of standardization, modularization, and then building that out as well. And also then looking at how it links together with the other parts of the balance of plant, so that you can really engineer out and then hopefully repeat.
One area that I would love to work with the electrolyser market more actually is on that gigawatt scale optimization, because I think what we're very used to now is seeing the stacks and the modules moving out from 5 megawatts to 20 megawatts to then having 10s to make 100 in a building. I think clients are now coming to us to say, well, show us what a gigawatt looks like, and we know that there's value to find in our engineering around not having 10 100s, but figuring out another way to make this simpler, cheaper, and then in the end.
Yeah, I think we see the same thing actually. There's actually looking at doing a lot of work, right? Where would be the natural breaks where you could actually, where it does make sense to do that, and then looking at how you fabricate as well. Going out, not just taking the components, but as much as through the oil and gas industry, learned through modularization, building, standardization, testing, getting it to site, minimizing the time and cost of on-site work as well. I think is a key factor. So, and I think there's, from our point of view, is looking at, and we see it through the other typical like wind industry, the costs going down through as you deploy. We've got a lot of work to do on our supply chain management, material costs, looking at how we can optimize on material, which is an issue, and that's a continual development program, and looking at newer technologies which are emerging, so that we can not just we do PEM primarily, but looking at how we can look at a portfolio, newer technologies emerge, or lower cost technologies.
Gents, we've covered a lot of ground there, and I'm certainly very optimistic. It feels like there's a lot of momentum within the market, and you're both optimistic about that. I'm going to move us to the final question now, which is the same one that we've been asking all of our guests on the podcast this week. If the theme for Offshore Europe is around accelerating that transition to a better energy future, I'm interested in both your reflections on what that means to you, and specifically for example, hydrogen's role in that. I'll start with yourself, Martin, and I'll give Keiren the last word.
Yeah, I mean, for me, Eamonn, I think it's symbolic, actually. I've been to a few conferences over the years and spoken about where we are with hydrogen in the UK and globally, and they're often talking shops around this would be a great idea, or this would be a great idea. But what we're really seeing now is that momentum to actually build projects. And for me, when we look at accelerating the energy transition, that's where we're at now. I think that this feels like the start of the kind of exponential curve, and when we come back here in 2 years' time, and I think it'll be totally different again. So I'm very optimistic.
Same here. I think we're very optimistic. I think hydrogen, low carbon hydrogen, has a key role in the energy mix of the future. As you say, frustrations we have, particularly in the UK, is the speed of rollout. But I think particularly Scotland, for example, you're sitting on the resource of renewable wind,
Yep.
key component there. And I think together we've got the ingenuity and the technology to make that realize it as well. And particularly what was interesting taking away from here is, my background is oil and gas, how the skill sets and the supply chain can adapt itself relatively quickly to these newer industries.
Yep.
So very hopeful, very optimistic. 2 years' time, hopefully we can tell you about the projects that we're all working on.
Absolutely. Well, look, listen, that's a great way to finish. So I'll thank you both, Martin and Keiren, for your time. There's a lot of great insights shared.
No, thank you, Eamonn. Thank you.
Thank you, Eamonn.
Yep.
Thank you, Martin.